Welcome to our Talk It Over segment today. Whether you're in a group talking about this or you're just watching online and you want to go a little bit further, think a little bit more about what we're talking about today, it's good to be seen, I guess. I'm here with France Olivier. France, always good to have you with us here in London. So great message today. We wanted to just spend a little bit of time going further in it. So first thing really, I'm in our series, God's Not Dead. I mean, why is it so important to actually tackle this question and to talk about that stuff?
Well, I think the critical issue is the implication behind the question. So the two alternatives are either God is dead or God isn't. If God is dead, it means that there's no hope, there's no way, there's no one we can turn to when the issues of life just become overwhelming. But that doesn't prove that God is real, just because we want God to be real. And I think that's the point about Calvin and Hobbes with Santa Claus. Then it just becomes wishful thinking. So it does then raise the question, well, is there sufficient evidence for God's existence? Because hopefully we want God to exist, but equally we want the evidence that it's actually real.
Okay, great. Now your title today was Real Faith Isn't Blind. I was thinking that's a term, faith is a term that Christians use a lot. You know, we use the word faith, but I mean, as you were talking about it, what do you really understand faith to be? What does it mean? What is that word?
That's a really good question, because for some people the wrong idea of faith actually becomes a hindrance to them being able to accept the evidence for God being real. And so the idea of blind faith means you believe something to be true even although there's no evidence to support the idea. So, and some people have the perception or even the accusation of Christians and other faiths that that's the kind of faith you're supposed to have. You're supposed to just believe something to be true, like Santa Claus, even though there's no evidence to support it. But that's not the kind of faith that the Bible speaks about. So the kind of faith the Bible speaks about is God invites us to reason with Him. The Bible speaks about evidence. I mean, I shared from 1 John 1, where it specifically says that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon and handled with our hands, concerning the word of life, that the expectation is to come and examine, look, see, feel, touch. And so we can look at archaeological records, we can look at the credibility of the Bible. There's lots of ways in which we can explore and find, is there evidence?
Okay, great. And maybe you've answered this a little bit, but as we engage with our world and people outside the church and friends that we have who don't go to church and that sort of stuff, I mean, you often find people saying things like, now faith is out of date, we've got science, we've got modern thinking, there's not really any place for faith and faith-based beliefs in a modern society. I mean, how would you respond to that when you encounter those sorts of conversations?
That's very good. I would say, for starters, if there isn't evidence for God, then fine. Then let's just accept that, and like the new atheist proponents are saying, let's just move on. But I would begin by challenging somebody to say, to what degree have you really explored? So I use the example of a forensics expert, which goes and looks at the evidence presented, even at a microscopic level, examines it because there's a rigorous process to trying to find the truth. And so I've had these conversations with people where I've challenged them and asked them, I said, have you explored the evidences? And I often speak about miracles. And I say, the miracles that we see recorded in the Bible didn't just happen then. They are actually happening right now. And even just last week, I heard about somebody at a church in Exeter who had been completely deaf and was prayed for and miraculously had their hearing completely miraculously restored. So you don't even have to travel to Africa or other places where there's claims of that kind of evidence. You can even go right here in England, and it's happening all over the place.
Great. So you shared a story today about when you were on a plane with a guy who was an atheist, and he suddenly had this revelation as you were talking that actually he had faith in some stuff. I mean, what are some of the kinds of things that the people who think they don't have faith actually do have faith in? What are some of the things they're believing by faith, even though they might not realize it?
Well, I think for some people the alternative to a faith in God would be faith in science, because they're convinced that science can explain, just the world we live in a way that excludes the necessity for God. So faith, and there's also faith in reason, our ability to actually reason out and come up with alternative explanations for the evidences that may point to God. So, and that was the case with this person on the plane. When I gave the hypothetical situation, if he was to be instantly miraculously healed, could that possibly just maybe be evidence, for God's existence? He was like, absolutely not. Science would have an explanation for that. So he was demonstrating faith in science, and so with that, he himself was disengaging his mind and not being the forensic expert to go and explore the evidence thoroughly.
So the truth is, there are many people who are believers, like me, who had a faith, but actually we grew up in the church, we grew up within a Christian worldview framework and that sort of stuff. So we have faith, but if we're honest, there probably are some areas where we do have blind faith. What one thing would you say to people who are like that, who, I believe in God and I have a faith, but actually if I'm pressed, I don't really have reasons, I don't really answers. What are a few things they could do to actually build some reasons for that faith?
That's very good. I have to say that I grew up in that kind of environment. I grew up in an environment that was very experiential, and the idea of actually thinking through what we believe wasn't encouraged. And my wife particularly was a great contributor to me engaging more deeply on the issues of faith.
Yeah, your wife's a biologist, isn't
and
she?
She's a biologist and a scientist, and,
Yeah.
And so she challenged my thinking, and through her example, I really began to think more deeply about what I believe, and also just the claims of the Bible, asking questions of the text. Does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense, why or why not? And just going deeper. And often it's in the greater mysteries, things that seem unexplainable, where the deepest, most profound truths actually lie. So my encouragement is begin with what the Bible says. If you're not convinced the Bible is true, well, begin by exploring the credibility of the Bible. There are many amazing people, scholars, that have done rigorous examination on the credibility of the Bible. So if you need to even start that far back, first try and determine, well, how reliable is the Bible in terms of its historical record, its texts, the quality of the text, the quantity of the text, the credibility of the writers of the text. All of those things you can actually go and examine and explore. So then if you feel, well, that's trustworthy enough, then go and see, does it actually make sense, or is it full of contradictions? Does it actually undermine itself, and is it coherent? So begin that exploration, and then look at the specific claims of the Bible, and the life of Jesus, his death, his resurrection, and the implications of those truths.
And I suppose as well, the voice of the skeptic in our world can often be so strong that maybe sometimes we have a little bit of a fear, what might I find if I start exploring this? But obviously you would say that actually real faith is able to explore those things and find that there is evidence, there is truth in that as well.
That is true. And I go even beyond that. I do believe, coming back to your point about some of us having grown up maybe with a description of a blind faith, I think that hopefully a motivation for us, even if it's not just for ourselves, it's for others who are struggling to come to faith, that we should explore. That's where I love this quote by William Wilberforce. I'll just read it again, where he said that Christianity has been successfully attacked and marginalized by these same groups because those who professed belief were unable to defend the faith from attack. Right? So people who are unable to defend it because they just hadn't thought it through enough. But then he goes on and says, even though its attackers' arguments were deeply flawed. So so even although there's this cultural war going on and that concept of faith is under attack, the reality is that there is tremendous substance and evidence and rational reasoning behind the faith that points us to then be able to trust a living God.
Great, thanks, Francis. Finally, just one thing, there may be some people watching or even in our groups who would say, well, I'm kind of checking this out, but if I'm honest, I'm a bit of a skeptic, or I'm at least seeking, but I don't really know if there is a God. What's one thing that you would say for them?
I'd say the main thing I want to really point out clearly is that there's a God who really does love us. And if he is who he says he is, that he is a God of love, and that he is powerful, and that he has a plan for our lives, then that is a God worth knowing. And so because of that, it's a God worth exploring and rigorously pursuing just the evidence that there is to be able to put our trust in Him. So please know, God does love you, and He does know that you exist, and He does have a plan for your life.
Great. Well, thanks, France. Always good to have you in London. And just to you, if you're in a group now, you'll be sitting down to talk about some questions about is faith blind, and real faith isn't blind, and some of those issues. And if you're just watching online and you're not in a group, I want to encourage you to find a group of people that you could talk about it with. If you want to join one of our groups, you'll see on our website there's a listing of some groups where you can get involved, and you can email us and we'll help you get hooked up. But just remember, it's very well to talk about these things academically, the what, but in our groups we also want to go from the what is truth, what does it say, what is the evidence, to a so what, and that shift is so important. What does it actually mean? What difference does it make? How do we live that way? How does that change things, the so what? And then the next shift we want to make is from the what to the so what to the now what. It's so easy to leave things as an academic pursuit but never get any further. Now, so we want to go to the now what. If these things are true, if these things that we've talked about are true, now what? What am I going to do about it? Whether I'm going to explore something, whether I'm going to make some decisions, whether I'm going to apply stuff to my life. So those are some of the conversations you're going to be having in your groups now. But all the best with it, and we look forward to seeing you next week at our second week of God's Not Dead.